Good morning, and thank you so much for attending the National Research Mentoring Network's Career Development webinar. Today we have a very exciting series, How to Handle More Than One Mentor to Achieve Excellence. Please do note that this webinar will be recorded and then placed on the NRMN YouTube channel in the upcoming weeks. Drs. Hinton Jr. and Shuler have graciously agreed to share the slide deck after the presentation. Also, we will allow about 15 to 20 minutes for a Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. So please do enter your questions into the chat feature and we will address those at that Q&A portion. Also, be sure to be on the lookout for more information about this upcoming webinar series. If you have not already signed up to receive the NRMN newsletters, please do so that you are abreast with notifications and webinars such as this. We have our March 12th series on the power of saying no. On March 19th, we also have challenges of mentoring underrepresented mentees and peers, trainees in STEM. So without further ado, please welcome our expert panelists, Drs. Antetnor, Othrell, Hinton Jr. and Dr. Haysetta Shuler. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. So next slide, please. Today we will discuss 3 most important educational objectives. So by the end of this presentation, you will be able to better understand and describe the roles of mentors in developing the next generation of trainees. Also, please be aware that you should also think of yourself as a trainee, even if you're a mentor, because you're always learning. Then the next one is describe current research on mentorship among underrepresented populations. So we will just not be covering historical populations that have been known to be minorities based upon ethnicity and race, but all underrepresented groups, and we'll try to provide examples of all. And then lastly, we'll apply skills, and you guys will also be able to apply skills to effectively communicate with individuals and other individuals that you're forming new mentoring relationships with. So next slide, please. So what is a mentor? A mentor can be a variety of different things, and please realize that not every mentor will be able to accomplish all the skill sets that you need. For example, if you look at the top left, see that some mentors can be excellent, some can be motivators, some can be exciting, some can be advisors or give you advice, and others can be fun, or some can be a role model. But sometimes it's best to have a tree that's planted deeply in the ground and you can understand how to watch them as they give you support. So if you look at the picture below, Dr. Shuler will explain the difference between a tree that has full, sizable leaves and branches and firmly rooted versus the mentee that's still growing and learning how to explore what a relationship like that looks like.
So yes,
Dr.
as
Shuler.
AJ has stated, as a mentor, you would want to be the root of the tree, meaning that you would always be available to provide the nourishment that your mentee may need, instead of being the branch of a tree, meaning that once the mentee is out of your reach, that you just drop off. Or the leaf or the tree, whereas a leaf, you blow whichever way the wind blows. And so if the mentee is going to the left, you're going to go to the left. If the mentee is going to the right, you're going to go to the right. If the mentee just falls off, you're going to fall off. So always position yourself as the root of the tree, the one who's providing the nourishment, whether they're still in your present as an undergraduate, a graduate, or they've gone into their professional career. So it's always important to remember, as a mentor, you're going to be there for a lifetime. Next slide.
Yes, so as we continue what a mentor is, I first would like to play a clip of Dr. Abel, who's the chair of internal medicine and DEO of internal medicine, and he also runs the Diabetes Research Center. These are some thoughts from him about how it's important to have multiple mentors and how he handled the situation.
the most influential moment?
Yes, sir.
Right. Well, I think it's difficult to say that there is really only one. I think that influential moments in my educational journey have really been linked to the interest that various mentors have had in my success over the years. I reflect back on all of my medical school professors whose knowledge of endocrinology motivated me to get to that field. I remember my Ph.D. mentor, Professor John Ledingham, who again really gave me the space and the freedom to pursue a scientific project of mutual interest. I remember my mentors during my residency, specifically Dr. Landsberg, and my mentors during my postdoc or fellowship, Barbara Kahn and Fred Wondersford, who really focused on the importance of excellence and rigor in everything that I do. And finally, it is noteworthy as well that as a junior faculty, when I was the recipient of a Harvard Famous Faculty Development Award, my scientific advisory board mentor, Dr. James Gavin, was also very instrumental. So I would say that to summarize this section, it really has been a series of mentors who really mentored a number of practices, both in terms of work ethic, but also in terms of being able to give me pointed career advice and direction, particularly later on in my career, I think have been very influential.
Okay, so as we think about what actually a mentor is, we've kind of thought of it as, this one tell-all snapshot into two sentences. The first one is a willing and trusted advisor. So that means someone that is interested in you and has intentional mentoring, someone that you can establish a relationship with, and then also one who counsels and provides emotional support. So that looks like multiple different things. And Dr. Shuler, would you expound on what we mean by provides emotional support?
Well, yes, Dr. Hinton, when we talk about emotional support, especially with our underrepresented students, the emotional support can stem from students who come from backgrounds that lack the pre-college exposure. And so once they enter upon a campus, like in an undergraduate program, where they're expected to behave in a certain way, or for example, to get to class on time, to go to the bookstore, to do homework, at that point, you'll find that some students are overwhelmed and they are ready to give up. So as a mentor, I find myself sometimes just coming in and allowing the student to express his or her disturbances, whether it be that they do not have good time management skills, they do not have good study skills, or they just perceive that no one is there to support them or understand what they're going through. So what I try to do is to be there with intentions to actively listen, to understand their perspective and help guide those emotions, because you'll find out that a lot of students are willing to just give up without learning how to maneuver through an undergraduate program. And we have to remember that students are here on campus without their parental support. They're here without a lot of their peer support from wherever home is. And so they're looking at us for such support. So that's why I have shared with AJ that I believe that it is important that we as mentors behave intentionally to say, we're here for you. Yes, you can cry. Yes, you may want to express how you're disappointed with a system, but we also are here to not only listen, but help guide those emotions, to help guide those perceptions to where they're healthy and where you can move on and be a successful mentee or student.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shuler. And then also just to tie it all together, we wanted to give you a little illustration of where mentor came from. So originally, most people thought it was mid-18th century, but before that, it was derived from French and Latin roots. And originally, the last or the earliest date of where it came from was actually from mentor, who was a Greek and he was an advisor to young Telemachus in the Homer's Odyssey. So could you please go to the next slide? So as Telemachus was growing up, he needed to be able to tell a story. And so the first thing to do is to find out who you are and what you want in life. And sometimes to be able to do that, you need an advisor who is willing to get dirty with you and really be able to help you tell your story in a constructive manner as if you're in a puzzle. Maya Angelou once said, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. And so I really believe that you have to be able to tell a story that's intentional, and that also means that the mentee and the mentor have to work together. You have to desire to achieve. This is both on the mentee and mentor end, ability to question, resolve, and meaning by resolve means not only to be able to understand a solution to a problem, but able to have the grit to be able to hang in there when you do have an issue. And then perseverance is to push through, and access to great verbal and nonverbal communication. A mentor should be willing to guide you in how to articulate, how to speak in a public setting, but also how to use your nonverbal communication skills to be able to tell a story even when you're not speaking. And then also, a mentor is willing to unlock your potential. One thing that I also like to think about is that what Stephen King said is talent is cheaper than table salt. What separates the talented individual from the successful one is a lot of hard work. So that is why in the case of a mentee has to be encouraged. And in order to do that, you have to be intentional. Dr. Shuler, I know that you have a couple of good points about being an intentional mentor. Would you be willing to share those?
Sure, Dr. Hinton. When we say intentional, that means that you are more than willing to go the extra mile to help mold the next generation. When I look at my mentees, it's all about the next generation. You are making an impact onto history. This is one way that I have found that is very successful in changing history, making a mark on history through my mentees. So I intentional go after mentees. I intentional sit and make a schedule according to what I need to do to serve a mentee. I intentional listen to a mentee. I intentional look for resources just for one or two particular mentees. I intentional make myself available. So whatever they need, I'm in place where they can reach out to me. I intentional build networks around me because I also know that I am not the only person that can help my mentees. So I have learned to build a network of people who can help facilitate and mold them into their career path. I intentional decide that I am going to mentor until I find something else to do.
Thank you, Dr. Shuler. So please go to the next slide. So as we recap the first section, I wanted to tell you guys two things. So the background on our slide, in case you're wondering, is a live image that came from the lab. So I just want to give homage to some of my mentees who helped capture that image. It's a confocal one slice of a Z stack that shows mitochondrial tracker staining in red and blue that's in DAPI. And as we think about that, a mentor can be a researcher, which was one of the kind of points that we touched on. They have to be able to understand who an individual is and be able to graft out the most out of them. And then also they can be a colleague, because a mentorship should be a relationship. And then they can be a speaker, teacher, and so many other points. Next slide, please. So as we think about this, we have to divide the roles of a mentor. We believe that the roles of a mentor should be thought of as a champion. Serena Williams said, I really think a champion is not defined by their wins, but how they can recover from when they fall. And so one thing about being a mentor is everything is not going to be perfect all the time. And that is why sometimes it's best to have a tailored specific piece dedicated to an individual that you're building a relationship with, meaning that a mentor should be focused around one particular category or another category. And so an example of that is having a mentor that just functions as an advisor, or a mentor that functions as a coach or a life coach, a listener or an encourager or motivator, or a role model that you want to emulate, and then an emotional support team, which could be multiple people. And so these are all common things that we think of that are included in a research mentoring space, but also just a mentor that may be helping you within your life. And I think it's also important to remember that not every individual will be able to mentor a person. It really takes a special mentor to be able to mentor every type of individual. And that individual has to have a lot of the skills that we're talking about next. And these are suggestions. Remember that everything in the PowerPoint are suggestions. You don't have to take it to heart. Pick and choose what you feel comfortable with understanding and moving forward to. Dr. Shuler has a couple of comments about the people that are in the picture, and then also following up some of these roles of a mentor. Go ahead, Dr. Shuler.
Sure. One of the gentlemen there who has on the red and black necktie, that is actually my chair, Dr. Bott. The next gentleman is Dr. Logan, who's one of the AP professors here in the Department of Biological Sciences. Working with both, I have learned so much about mentoring our students. Dr. Bott, for an example, he is a true advocate for our students. He goes the extra mile, and he is an excellent role model for the spirit of excellence. He gives a lot of emotional support by actually sending the students my way. As far as Dr. Logan is concerned, he is an excellent advisor. He's always encouraging students to go beyond their comfort zone. He's always encouraging students to take responsibility for their academic success. Dr. Logan and Dr. Bott together, they both make a great team. And I am so proud to say that they're part of my network as to when I'm having an issue or needing a resolve with a mentee. These two gentlemen here has always given me excellent advice. They also work with AJ when he was a student here, I should say, Dr. Hinton, and they have had a great impact not only on Dr. Hinton's life, but a lot of our alums. As a matter of fact, we have a mentor program that is made up of alums from the biology department, and they have learned to be great role models and mentors for the current students. And one of the things that most of the alums are saying now, and it's good to hear, that they have learned to become great motivators. They have learned the importance of giving that support to the entire student. You can no longer just serve a student in one area as a mentor. You must serve their whole student, meaning you must meet all of their needs or be willing to listen to what it is they need or to discern what they need. So again, I am just so proud to be surrounded by Dr. Bott and Dr. Logan.
Thank you very much for that. Next slide, please. And as we think about having a diverse set of mentors, sometimes we have to develop a plan of action to where our traditional mentor in a research setting is able to give us all the things that we need. And I'm speaking from a voice as a mentee or as a mentor as well. So you have to think about it in the capacity that you're in. So if we think about it as giving advice to mentors and also to ourselves so that we continuously are improving, I would like to start off with Serena's quote, which says, "I am lucky that whatever fear I have inside of me, my desire to win is always stronger." So being a mentor, you will be scared because you don't know what kind of student you're getting. Sometimes students come in, as we like to say, as a popular slang term, a hot mess. And then sometimes students come in the capacity that they're well put together and they're polished. So there's always that gray area as well, where a student may have some of the components and you see the potential, but it's hard to harness it. And so one way that we can do that is thinking about a career development path. And that's what we think a traditional mentorship provides, which is a way to keep stepping up each ladder at one step at a time and be able to reach your goal of going to the top. Additionally, we also think that a mentor should be able to provide psychological support during that process, because it can be a taxing process to be able to get to a final product. Serena Williams didn't win 23 Grand Slams just by focusing on one aspect of her game. Most people talk about, her serve, but now over the last couple of years, she's really focused on really enhancing her whole body of work. And her mentor pushes her in ways that she feels are very uncomfortable. Next slide, please. But the uncoupling of success comes through taking things apart before they are put back together. And when we think of a mentor, they also sometimes have to be an educator. So the slide talks about education and mentorship. And before we dive deeper into the slide, I want to touch back on a point that Dr. Shuler talked about, which was great teachers serve the whole student. Our mentors or an educator serve the whole student, meaning that you have to think about the entire student. And sometimes we also have to think about the cultural aspect of students, especially when they're coming from different age groups, languages, ethnicities, and have different religious backgrounds. So this requires that a mentor to be a researcher once again, not in the capacity of only a lab, but actually understanding a student's culture, their family structure, and what skills that are unique to them that they can provide that can enhance the team or also just the individual relationship between the two individuals. Another thing that I want you to think about as when we're thinking about education is that no matter what the goals are, they can be simple. And sometimes you can set one goal at a time and you reach it and then you reassess and you say, okay, how can I help the next person? How can I pay it forward? So you want to get your mentor to teach you, and then you want to take those skills as a mentee and push forward to the next person. So we're going to be talking about a lot of through the slides saying paying it forward. And so that means taking the information that's given to you, remembering it, and then reteaching it, because 85% of what you actually teach someone else, you remember. And so this is the concept that we want to be able to share, sharing of knowledge. And that's the importance of having more than one mentor, because you learn different skill sets and they no longer become table saw. They actually become hard work and talent put together to actually make a meal. So the last point of this slide is it's talking about how sometimes teachers aspire to educate and to give you a knowledge base and positive change, but sometimes you don't know how to actually direct that. So next slide, please. So Dr. Shuler will talk about how to direct those pieces of knowledge into key points about what it means to be an educator and a mentor.
Thank you. So how we put those key knowledge skills together, it depends on, again, as AJ has, or Dr. Hinton has mentioned, we have to consider this baggage of different components from their background, the background of the student. So what may work for one student, you may have to tweak it a little bit for the next student. So how do we harness on the knowledge and the skills and then enhance their critical thinking and analytical thinking skills? One way is by doing a little assessment. And assessments can come in different forms. Here at WSSU, we have a variety of assessments. And one of the assessments that I actually use and is most effective is that I allow students to have a conversation. It's very informal. And I ask them how to take specific knowledge that has been shared and entwine it into a real life situation. So we call that learning how to apply knowledge, the application of knowledge. Then I go into a next step, and then I actually allow them to just train in certain areas on their skills. We may go in a lab, we may do something like a web talk, we may do a mock interview of some kind, to where they can use those skills in that particular setting. Then there are opportunities for them to serve in different capacities where they can use their critical thinking skills and enhance those critical thinking skills and analytical thinking skills. So it takes a variety of opportunities to be formed together, and you decide what works for this type of student and what didn't work. Then the most important, and I say it's very important, because I love to not only give feedback to my mentees, but I love to receive feedback from my mentees, because this is one way I have learned and have come to appreciate that the door continues to revolve, meaning that I am not the only one in this game. I am not the only one as part of this relationship. It is two or three. So I have to be willing to do exactly what I'm asking and expecting my mentees to do. So to support the improvement of everything that AJ has just mentioned, it takes this and then some. And again, there is no one set of objectives or goals or ideas that fit one particular student. Each student, even though we're at an underrepresented college or university, they come in with different needs, and you as mentors, you must be flexible, you must be willing, and you must stay intentional. Next slide.
Thank you, Dr. Shuler. Dr. Shuler, can you hear me? Sorry about this, everyone. There was a technical difficulty on my part. Dr. Shuler, can you hear me?
You hear me?
Dr. Shuler, can you hear me? Yes, ma'am, I can hear you. We apologize for the technical difficulty, but it just shorted out in the office. I apologize, but as we continue, so one key point that I wanted to say as we touch from the next slide and transition to the next is about Venus Williams' quote. She says that some people say I have an attitude. Maybe I do, but I think that you have to believe in yourself when no one else does. That makes you a winner right there. And so this quote is kind of interesting because you're going to understand a lot of times that students will have an attitude. Students will project that they know it all. And sometimes students are not even in the right setting or have the right training of knowledge to understand that they may be good at something, but they're not called to do those particular things. And I give an example by this picture that I have. I was lucky enough to have great mentors so that I could emulate and teach and be able to work in the diversity office here at the University of Iowa. But I'm also a researcher, and that's what I came to do, which is actually to refine my skill set as a researcher. And one thing that my boss, Dr. Abel, does very well is he allows me to supervise my students and allows me to help them increase their performance and rectify behaviors, help them encourage them in a positive way, and also increase their productivity. But the main thing that he does is also reminds me and manages me in a team setting, keeps me in the right frame of mind to continuously improving myself. So this points to the question about who is supervising you. As a mentee, you are being supervised by a mentor, but when you're setting in the lab setting, you actually have to sometimes adjust how you think. You're accountable not just to your mentees, but also to your next generation, which means that you have to continue to sharpen your skills. For example, Dr. Bott at the university that Dr. Shuler's at, which is Winston-Salem State, he has other mentors that improve him, even though he's the chair of the department. And you also personally heard that my boss, Dr. Abel, also has mentors like Dr. Barbara Kahn, who's at Harvard, who was a previous mentor of his that he stays in contact with to continue to propel him forward. And Billie Jean King says it's best. I think self-awareness is the most important thing to being a champion. So constantly understanding who you are is the best skill set that you can possibly have. And one way to do that is with a life coach. Next slide, please. A life coach is someone who develops the skills that will help you to be a better person, to help you achieve your life work and your personal life, and also in your career, and helps you redefine what those goals may look like. And a coach also allows for you to develop a better mentor-mentee relationship and allows you to understand what it means to have multiple relationships or goals that you need to reach, and they'll push you towards those things. Dr. Shuler, do you have any comments about being a coach?
Sure. I, again, go back, when I think of being a life coach, is a desire. Again, it's an desire to inspire, and you must, I would say it is important to have the passion to serve others. So when we put life coach and mentor in the same boat, we notice that there's one common component, and that is to serve. That is to serve others. It's more than like this building a little mini me of yourself. So again, it goes back to being intentional. It goes back to having the desire. It goes back to wanting to serve others with a passion, to look forward to the future. When we want to serve in our best capacity, it is best to go through a student, I believe, because you're imparting some part of you into that student, and the student is taking it forward into his or her next step in life. And as a witness, I have enjoyed having students to come back to say how much they not only appreciate just myself, but the entire department and how we've influenced their life and helped them to make those better choices in life and to fulfill their goals. So that's what I think of as a life coach.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shuler. Next slide, please. And as we think of a coach, sometimes a coach knows the right network of people to help you push you to that next goal. So he or she will give you a sponsor that can become an advocate. And what I mean by that is one who provides funds or support for an activity that you're trying to achieve or get towards or achieve that you've never done before. And a sponsor also will be a career champion. They will put you in the room with someone that you had no clue that you could be in the room with. For example, there is a professor that's at the University of Pittsburgh who mentors me. And again, as you notice, I have multiple mentors and I balance them for different things. I have a conversation maybe once a month with this mentor and ask her, what do you think is the next step? And then sometimes just randomly she'll drop down a line and an email says, I thought about this, which I have no clue about. And she just drops it in my email and says, I encourage you to apply. And then maybe 1 week later, she'll call and say, did you apply? How can I assist you in this process? So a career champion pushes you and propels you to the next step. And it helps to think of a career mentor as someone also as a friend that's guiding you to things that may be uncomfortable, but giving you the truth of the situation. So that's why we think of a sponsor as one that serves the mentor and the mentee, because when you position yourself as a sponsor or an advocate for an individual, you're thinking about what best works not only for the mentee that's trying to gain these new skill sets, but also what the mentor can glean from this new interaction. This means that a mentor could actually be able to talk to an individual a little bit better from a different angle if they think this person's a better role model for them. And so that way, sometimes it takes a group to raise a student. It sometimes takes a village to raise an individual, as we say in our community, in the African-American community, a child. And so in order for them to reach to that adulthood, it allows for them to have clarity of thought. And clarity of thought comes when you challenge people, next slide please, to feel for themselves not to be on an island by themselves, but actually feel as though they are part of a team. And in this particular picture that's over to the right, this is a picture that's captured at Winston-Salem State of Dr. Bott working with students. And one thing that Dr. Bott does really well is functions as a root so that other people can grow. And he tries to tell people not only to reach their goals in one way, but he opens doors for them to help them actually achieve this goal. And that is the key thing that I want you to take home about being a sponsor. Next slide, please. So as we approach being a mentor and a role model, before we get into this slide, I wanted to take home the message that Dr. Shuler and I had discussed privately about being a sponsor. So Dr. Shuler, could you share your thoughts about that before we get into the mentoring and role models slide?
Okay, one thing Dr. Hinton and I had talked about is as a sponsor, the sponsor again serves both the mentor and the mentee. Without the sponsor, depending on the situation, it can make it difficult for a mentor to maneuver through the different challenges as he or she is moving up towards his career path. And the mentee, it is important for the mentee to have trust established between that sponsor, because you do not want to misguide your mentee. You do not want your mentee to take to go into these traps, is what I call them, and not have the resources to bring them back, because the last thing I desire to do is to cause discouragement. However, I do not mind having them to, or helping them to overcome the obstacles. So I think it's very important that there's trust between the mentor and the sponsor, and whatever the sponsor is providing, it is beneficial for the mentor and the mentee, not just for this one opportunity, but for opportunities for your future mentees. Next slide.
Thank you very much. So as we talk about mentors, one thing to think about is that some mentors can actually serve as role models in a capacity that's separate from being a structured mentor in the lab or a mentor for a specific task. So role models could be someone in the future that they aspire to be like. For example, on this slide, there's Dr. Ken Pepion from the left. To the right, there's Dr. Ricardo Correa, and then on the next one is Dr. Zervu, and then the last picture is Dr. Perla Rodriguez. And one thing, if you notice that they're all of minority descent in different ways. Dr. Ken Pepion is, I would regard as the highest ranked Native American professor to work through the NIH and also help champion for the MARC and the NIH-funded programs like the FASF MARC Travel Award, in addition to funding the scholarships that were available for a lot of students to be able to come to the Institute of Teaching and Mentoring. And then also, Dr. Pepion has helped with some of the build programs that are around the country that larger institutions help structure at medium-sized and historically Black colleges. Dr. Ricardo is a champion, has won presidential mentorship awards. He's won so many awards that it's hard to keep up with all the things that he's done. And then Dr. Zervu, she's Hmong, H-M-O-N-G, which most people would think she's just Asian, but she's actually a very special type of Asian where they've gone through genocide within their culture and they've had to be refugees and move to the United States and other countries from where they were originally located. And there's only 4 to 5 million of them worldwide left. And Dr. Perla Rodriguez is actually a life coach of her own, and she's a physical trainer. She has a Ph.D. and she also has a clinical master's degree, and she's now pursuing her medical degree. She wants to be the best career counselor there possibly was, and she wants to go through every situation so that she's able to actually give the best advice to students. So the reason I talk about this is because mentors sometimes have to join with other mentors to be able to raise a mentee up. And sometimes if you don't necessarily look like your mentee, you have to find common ground. And one thing I want to think about from the research that was published in the Journal of Vascular Surgery that was entitled Mentors in Academic Medicine, and it's a review of the literature, they talked about mentor residents were nearly twice as likely to describe excellent career preparation, but underrepresented minority residents were less likely to establish a mentoring relationship than their peers. So as you see, these are 4 examples of relationships that could be built with a mentee. Not necessarily at your institution, you may have an African American, but you may have a Native American or an Asian group that is not well established and very underrepresented that you can use to your advantage when mentoring an underrepresented student from a different background. This also could be, work in the same capacity as if they're a woman or a member of the LGBTQ community. So that's something to think about as well. And then also one other thing I want you to think about is that mentoring plays an important role in perceived outcome on career readiness, but also exposes the difficult underrepresented students face in developing a relationship with a mentor. So we have to be careful about how we mentor. This goes back to the key point of being intentional at all times, because without intentionality, we're not going to be able to push students forward. And it's also very important that you think of mentors as understanding of the cultural parameters and thinking about how these cultural parameters can enhance minorities and also how their experiences before they even get to the lab or in a workforce or in an academe of any type or industry or even, in corporate America, how their experiences affect them as an individual and how it affects their thinking before they even get there. So sometimes mentors need to have established links to what a role model should do. And sometimes a mentor can also serve as a role model by just saying, today I'm going to function as a counselor, and for 5 minutes before I start lab meeting, I'm just going to ask how everyone's doing, because there's so many things that are going on in the world. And we have to think about how an individual is facing those outcomes along and how it actually can affect one's science as well as their personal and professional development. Next slide, please. So as we think about this, sometimes mentees need a space where they can feel safe. And one example of this is the picture that's below, which is from Baylor College of Medicine. When I was there getting my PhD, we had a group called the African American Men's and Science Group that was run by Dr. Chester Brown and Dr. Neil Hanchard. And one thing that I loved about both of them was that they were intentional about how they mentored individuals. And one thing I also liked was that they realized that they were a little bit older schooled, and they brought another individual to the table, Dr. Corey Reynolds, who is an associate professor at Baylor College of Medicine and also currently functions as a program manager in industry. And the good thing about this is there was multiple areas that he could touch on that others couldn't. And mentors were secure in the fact that they could not touch on every area. but they knew where to get the actual representation that they needed to be able to address certain points. So when you think about a mentor-mentee concordance, it's not always to fill a role that you can't fill, but it's sometimes connecting the mentee to someone that they can actually feel safe with to address these concerns. So one of the key points that I'm touching on in the slide, it says that mentoring can play a significant role in addressing the lack of minority faculty and students at the academic healthcare institutions, as it provides an avenue for interaction and camaraderie amongst underrepresented students and also faculty and staff. And that's why I said that a safe zone is needed for mentees so that they can see individuals that look like them and going through the same goals. But at the same time, because you need advisors or mentors for this group that maybe look like them or someone that is additionally working with them in this space, they have someone that can actually mentor them. For example, we have a prep program where I serve as a mentee and a mentor at the same time. I'm a mentor to the prep students in the capacity of several different jobs as far as academic and career development, but I'm a mentee as I learn more about how to be on the steering committee, and my professor, who's also my boss in the lab, Dr. Abel, walks through certain things with me, as well as Dr. Hammond, to teach me how to be a better champion for students and how to develop better safe spaces for students. And I also want to bring to your attention that it's important to think of gender and ethnic similarities between mentor and mentees. So you may not know everything that it takes to be an African American or a Hispanic American, but you can sympathize and empathize with someone on different levels based upon your experiences. So I challenge you to incorporate personal experiences and personal stories in your mentorship so that it's tailor-made for that individual so that they feel welcome and wanted. Next slide, please. So as you think about things that can influence the success of a relationship, you have to be aware that there are high-stakes situations, conflict around being a mentor and a manager, and then there's also things that we don't commonly think of that mentees face on a daily basis. We often, sometimes in the laboratory setting, we think of stress, anxiety, dealing with bullying in the workplace, lack of knowledge and bias that a mentee could face, but sometimes the mentor doesn't think about that because they're concerned about the next grant. They're concerned about the next paper. They're concerned about the next review article. These things are the livelihood of the lab, but also your trainee and your personnel are as well. So we have to be able to have a well-balanced laboratory by being able to understand what is a high-stakes situation, giving people enough time to prepare and have the time management to take on that set of skills. And if they don't have those skills, who can help them acquire those skills? And then again, you become a champion as a sponsor so that they can receive those skills. And then you carry it out by being a coach, especially around the time that there may be conflict because you're challenging them to do something different. One thing I want you to think about is what Michelle Obama has said. Success isn't about how much money you make, and it's about the difference you make in people's lives. So as a mentor, you have to continuously be intentional about how you develop a student or a longer lasting relationship like a postdoc or a faculty member, because it's very important that you leave your brand on them but not make a clone. Dr. Shuler, I know we talked about in private when we were preparing for this, some factors that you thought were important to success besides what was just mentioned here. Could you elaborate on those?
Yes, those factors to influence your success, as you see listed on the screen here, I think it's also important that you mindfully call out that elephant in the room, as we call it. Don't be afraid to address the differences, especially when you may not be of the same ethnic group as your mentee. So it is important that you mindfully call out that elephant in the room and that you be vulnerable to share your struggles with your mentee. Also realize that it is also important that if we're going to make that change with or help those that are underrepresented in academia, it is important that we must approach them from a holistic approach and be systematic with it, but also have that holistic approach and know that you're committed, believe that you're committed to serving the student. If I truly believe if As mentors, the more authentic you are with your mentee, the more trust you're going to build and the more success you're going to have as a mentor and a mentee. Next slide.
So these next set of slides are things that we want you to keep in mind about mentorship, and could hopefully think about them as considerations that you want to really pay attention to as you mentor underrepresented groups. And remember, underrepresented groups can be disabled individuals. It could mean LGBTQ plus individuals. It could mean women. It could also be ethnic minorities and racial backgrounds, or it could also be people that are from different classes, such as first-generation students or from different economic backgrounds. So really start to expand on what you think underrepresented means, because now the NIH has tailored the definition to gain a little bit better clarity so that everyone's on the same page. And this also means individuals that are rural. And so we face a lot of that in Iowa, where people come from farming towns, but they are also adjusting to life here. And how does that look for them? That can be a very scary process. And as we think about that, one thing to keep in mind when you're mentoring underrepresented groups is stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is a situational predicament in which people are feel themselves to be at risk of confronting some stereotypes about their social group or their religion. So one thing to keep in mind also with stereotype threat is it's a contributing factor to longstanding racial and gender gaps in academic performance. And that truly, when you apply stereotype threat on a daily basis, it could affect you. I have two pictures over to the right for an example of stereotype threat. One is at the top, where you see Dr. Clark staring at a screen. He looks disinterested, but if you know Dr. Clark, he actually looks very engaged, and he's pondering about probably a myriad of things, trying to understand how the enzyme kinetics work. What if I add this particular metabolite to the substrate? Does that change the substrate's efficiency, the power of the enzyme? Dr. Clark is a very brilliant man who's a retired faculty member from Winston-Salem State, but also had got his Ph.D. from UNC Chapel Hill, and he worked at Burroughs Wellcome Fund for a long time. And so he's very familiar with pharmaceuticals and how the industry works. And he actually runs and sits as the chair of the biotechnology committee in North Carolina as he's retired, and he gets back into his community. But you wouldn't know all that if you actually looked at him and just said, this is an African-American man that I'm trying to train in the lab, and he looks disinterested. But in fact, based upon his nonverbal cues, if you actually got to know him, you would know this is a face that says, oh, he's actually very interested. But at the bottom, you see a picture of him speaking, more relaxed and more comfortable, and he's smiling, so he doesn't feel like he's a threat to anyone. But we have to change the way we think about individuals based upon what we've seen in the media. So you have to think of that individual as one person, not a group representing for the entire class of people or the entire intersection of what that means for that race or ethnicity. So I also want you to think about stereotype threat in the sense of performance gaps. And Billie Jean King said it best: pressure is a privilege. Next slide. And the reason I want you to talk about this in more detail is because as a mentor, you will face a lot of pressure because you have a minority student, or you may have an underrepresented group, and you're challenged by your colleagues to say, oh, well, you know, how's that individual doing in the lab? You know, are they panning out? Because, you know, I know that women, you know, they're not that good at math, or I know that African Americans, you know, tend to, struggle with retaining information, or they have short memories from what I understand. And Latinx people, you know, they have more other issues to worry about than their academic performance, such as their family. And, you know, sometimes when you say a mentor also may be an underrepresented individual, and they may be also causing to think about things in a stereotype where they think, well, I'm not going to invite that individual to a basketball game or to a football game because they're not interested in it because they can't play sports. That's one common stereotype that's associated with Caucasians. And then also LGBTQ community as well with sports, and then also femininity. a lot of gay men often are what mainstream would call flamboyant. And usually in academia, we don't associate those skill sets with performance or a high quality researcher. And so we have to think about the capacity of why we think this way and how we can change that. Another stereotype threat is age and memory. Someone of Dr. Shuler's age, who's a little bit older than me, doesn't mean that she's less. It actually means that she's more because she's experienced more things. So we have to learn how to incorporate those beautiful things that she's faced in her life into the way that she can actually become more of a well-rounded individual to serve the lab or the team or an individual if she's mentoring. So what I mean by these stereotypes, threats, and an example of this, next slide, please, is thinking about the Claude Steele study. Claude Steele was a psychologist who was asked to discover the underlying causes of perceived Black student academic deficits. So he asked himself a question: are these stereotypes true? And is it true that African Americans or Black students perform worse than white and Asian students in college? And of course, the overwhelming answer to what was yes, but he then asked a follow-up question about why. And so one thing is called a concept that's called about race priming. And when he published this study, he talked about race priming in the context of several different things. One, I just want to give you the general definition. Race priming is indicated as an increased impact on racial attitudes on evaluations of relevant political candidates or policies. And what this is important around and why this is important to think about is two things. One, during this particular study that Claude did, he actually gave a indication about race. So he made sure that there was a way to designate an individual's race on a test before taking the test. And so when they did this, this actually initiated them to say, oh, okay, well, there's a concern, there is a need that you will perform worse because this is their mindset of thinking, and they did perform worse. But when this racial priming was not there, they excelled. Next slide, please. So we have to think about this in the form of multiple avenues. Not only is stereotype a main issue when you're thinking about performance of a mentee, but also microaggressions. Microaggressions are perceived as incidences that were intentional but subtle marginalizations, and they leave a negative impact on performance over time. For example, if I'm a mentee and you see over to the right, I have two pictures with me taking image with someone at the same conference. One was Dr. Melanie McReynolds, who's at Princeton and who's a HHMI and Hannah Gray's investigator, and Dr. Ken Pepion, who just recently retired, a professor as well. He would be perceived as a man that has a Ph.D., but if I'm in the same picture with Melanie, she may not be perceived as having a Ph.D. She may be perceived as my mentee, but actually we're peer mentees. We actually help each other, and we're peer mentee and mentor relationships depending on the situation. So I want you to think about this in the regard of what Michelle Obama would say: when they go low, we go high. So that means that you have to address the situation when it comes up, but in a way that would produce excellence, not lower the standard or the perception of what you already are facing. So an example of that is, wow, your English is really good. You're very articulate. This may be a case for any ethnic minority group, but especially sometimes Asians. And so you cannot stereotype an individual to demonstrate that, yes, because you speak another language doesn't mean that you have poor English skills. It could be just the opposite, and they could be very articulate. Another thing is to keep in mind is that when you tell a group or you tell an individual, you say, oh, you should be good at this. You're a student that, comes from this particular background, so you should be very strong at doing math, for example. Or telling an African American or Hispanic, when they're talking amongst their friends and you hear a conversation and you tell them afterward, you didn't have to work twice as hard to get here. You didn't have to overcome the same amount of things. You overcame less because you had a hand, because you were a minority. We have to be really understanding of what it means to be challenged in these areas of microaggressions. Next slide, please. And then we also have to think about macroaggressions, because sometimes deliberate and immediate negative comments have a long-standing on how an individual can perform. And in fact, sometimes it impedes the learning process altogether. There have been studies done by Dr. Kenneth Gibbs, who's at the NIH, and he's particularly the NI and GMS director for a lot of training programs. He's done research that demonstrates that individuals that are women and from underrepresented groups go back into industry because of the environment that they face in academia. So it's very important to make sure that you teach yourself not to go low, but actually go high, as Michelle Obama has said. Dr. Shuler, I know that you have some thoughts on micro and macroaggressions. Would you like to chime in?
Yes, very briefly here, Dr. Hinton. Just piggybacking off what he has said, I'm always mindful of my actions. I choose my words carefully when I do speak, especially with African American females and males as well, because it doesn't take much, depending on the background, to discourage or cause regression instead of progression with students when they are constantly bombarded with the negativity of being judged by the color of their skin versus their character, judged as a group versus being judged as an individual, or they're just judged because of what someone else has done in the past that looks like them. So as a mentor, I am very choiceful, I'm very intentional, I'm very careful when I do speak with any of the African American students, whether it's male or female, and I refrain from using certain words. Although I'm an African American myself, I still refrain from using certain words because it does leave a mark, and it's not a good mark, it's a negative mark. And so if we want to help continue to increase our presence in STEM, we must remember not to inadvertently make negative comments to impede the learning or performance of our mentees. Next slide.
So as we start to close, because we're almost over time, we're going to go a couple more slides so that we can focus on some of these key points. But we also want to make sure that you use the second half of the presentation that's called What's in it for me, and go from there and actually practice these skill sets. There are things that help you to build a relationship. There are things in here that teach you how to address your networking skills about building a trademark, and they also are helpful little clips in there that will help you to get where you need to. So I just want to close with a couple of key points. First, can you actually go back 2 slides, please? Thank you. So for tokenism, I just wanted to tell you that as you mentor underrepresented groups, sometimes at very elite institutions or larger institutions, you'll have a tokenism effect that goes around where you pick an individual. So if you see that Dr. Shuler's in this picture, and she took this picture so that we could actually be able to set up this example, so thank you. It's interesting if you see this is a recruitment table and she's the only one there. She's the only one taking an image, and she's being the model citizen for the entire ethnic group of African Americans. So everyone looks to her for the answers of excellence. And so we want you to think about this, and we also want to remind ourselves of this to caution you to not have the gay representative, or have the African American representative, or have the woman representative, or have the Asian representative for science. You want to be able to show these individuals as people and as researchers or presenters that are changing the field, not to speak about only their ethnicity, because the individual is much more than that. So we kind of define tokenism as a way that a person has to express their thoughts or give comments on their entire ethnic or religious group. So also if Dr. Shuler was a Muslim and she was a person that practiced Islam, she would have to wear a hijab potentially, and depending on where she's from in a particular region. And sometimes a PI may ask a person that has a hijab on, well, do you all have to wear that? It's very offensive to do such things because it can cause unnecessary harm to an individual. So I hope that mentors can think that an individual should not speak for their entire group, that it would be better if they actually work together to do that. And Michelle Obama said it best: I am desperate for change. Now, not 8 years or 12 years, but right now. A lot of times in the safe spaces, minorities have these conversations, but they're never heard. So mentors, I challenge you, and I also challenge myself and Dr. Shuler to continue to champion for others that do not have a voice. As they work hard for you in your laboratory or in industry or a government job or in just corporate America, make sure that they're heard. Make sure that sometimes you have to amplify their voice. And it shouldn't be that minorities amplify minorities' voices or underrepresented groups champion for each other. It should mean that we all work together to do that. So the last thing I wanted to do, go back 2 slides down to the unconscious biases, please. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to give an understanding about unconscious biases. Unconscious biases is very important because we often don't think of how to really truly understand or hear someone. We will perceive them as a certain way and will represent them as a certain way continuously. And it's important to not do that. And so what we coin as unconscious biases are prejudices in favor of or against one thing, person, or a group compared with another, usually in a way that is considered to be unfair. So an example that I gave on the previous slide was talking about one person that has a Ph.D., Dr. Melanie McReynolds, versus Dr. Pepion. So you have to think about that each individual is a person that has career goals and wants to reach those goals. And you can't think of them as less than because of their color of their skin or their sexuality or their gender. So we all have to be aware and cognizant of those things. And if you don't know how to work with an individual like that, sometimes it's good to take a stop at the diversity office to champion for an individual. Next slide, please. So now, what's in it for me? I just wanted to touch on the 3 main points about what is actually, why it's actually good to have a mentor. A mentor will awaken your potential. A mentor can help establish strong networking skills, and a mentor can help you establish trust with others. So all of these things are very important, and it helps you to be able to push your life forward and push your network forward on how to build stronger relationships. Dr.
It appears some technical difficulties on Dr. Hinton's end. Dr. Shuler, I believe that he was requesting if you had any additional contributions to what's in it for me surrounding mentorship.
Yes, thank you. The only other comments I can think of is that as what's in it for me is that you're actually offering possibilities. As a mentor, you're also helping to clarify vision. And as I said previously, as a mentor, you are that pathway for open doors. Next slide. Okay, and as Dr. Hinton has already gone over, it's just going over how to build strong relationships. And as we all know, building or walking through those right networks, and it takes out just not one step, but you have a myriad of diverse ideas that comes together. You have a collage of people from different backgrounds that have come together, but you have to have that communication part in order to build that right network. Also, you have to be able to be innovative, creative, and you're looking for ways to advance a person's career or your mentee's career. You must remain innovative. It's important to be aware of the trends that are occurring around you. And you also have to be able to ask that key question, focusing on what can I do as a mentor? How can I help establish the goals and open doors for my mentee? And one of the ways that we are currently seeking out is how do we actually get our message across through the various social medias. And then we are looking at ways of how we can actually continue this momentum with inviting more mentees into our session by doing webinars like we're doing today. One of the things that Dr. Hinton is famous for is he's always on Twitter. So it's all about sharing ideas, sharing what you've learned, and inviting others in. This is how we can continue to build those strong relationships. Next slide. I believe Dr. Hinton is back online.
Oh, Dr. Hinton, I believe there's we're having some issues with your audio. Hang on one second. Okay, can you test one more time? Oh, okay, hang on one second.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as we close, I wanted to talk about technology and mentoring, and we can just leave the last slide here and transitioning into actually asking questions. So as you start to navigate social spaces, I wanted to make sure that you're aware of all the apps that are out there and to be able to get some guidance on how you should actually initiate e-mentoring. As we talk and champion today for mentorship, I want you guys to also think about how you actually can pay it forward. One way that you could do this is with the National Research Mentoring Network, and you can be able to find mentors online, especially when you feel that your voice is not heard or you may not receive everything that you can from the mentor that you have. And you can do that also on Twitter as well. But I would start with the National Research Mentoring Network because there's so many mentors that are available. And let's say you want to have a mentor at Harvard or Baylor College of Medicine or University of Arizona, you can have that. And it can be in real live time on various days while you're at your institution. In addition, I also challenge you to think about how to use professional groups such as GroupMe or Slack to be able to have groups that help champion each other and push people forward and actually propel them to be better. And then also social media spaces as well, like Twitter or Facebook or WeChat or Instagram. I want you guys to, or LinkedIn, I want you to all to think about how to use those medias in a way that allows you to have your trademark out there as a brand that people are used to seeing and that they want to continuously see or they want to encourage or like you. So I challenge you to be careful with what you place online. And mentors, I also challenge you to be able to help mentees make decisions about how to have a professional networking space online and what that looks like. And if you're uncomfortable or not able to do that, there are certain scientific influencers that could help you to do that. There is a group that at Unique Scientists does that very well. And also, I also want you to challenge yourself by going to the diversity office to be able to find spaces or in the career development office that will allow you to be able to answer those questions about how to navigate social media. And if you don't have a career development office, I highly recommend Baylor College of Medicine's career development office, which Derek Hasseltine runs. And he does a great job of understanding what's current and how to use the space that's provided to him to be able to have other people champion for him or teach mentees how to champion for themselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time today, and we'll answer questions.
Great, thank you so much. So our first question, I was interested in submitting a one-page LOI for RCMAR pilot grant program for which we needed to identify potential mentors. I contacted 2 mentors who are pioneers in the field to what I was going to propose. One of whom knows me directly, having done postdoctoral training at their career center, and the other I have met at several conferences. I asked them that I wanted to draft specific aims in consultation with them, and since they are pioneers in the data I am using. One of them responded, this person who knows me from my postdoctoral program, I am sorry, I'm not sure if I understand your question. When you have something specific, I hope I can help. The other hasn't responded as of yet, and I'm wondering how to handle and approach going forward with these potential mentors to get them to mentor me. I'm not sure if they're interested in me as a mentee.
I see. So there's a couple of things. One, I would suggest try to reintroduce yourself, not just necessarily with the research, but you would simply say, hi, my name is this. I'm from this institution. I am interested in potentially writing a grant and being mentored by you. I have attached my CV and my resume, maybe a bio so that you can be more familiar with what I'm doing. And then maybe provide your aim, such as specific aim. Say, this is my thought for specific aim 1 and specific aim 2, and this is my central hypothesis and the hypothesis that I'm testing in each aim. And I would like to have mentorship around that. And if they say yes to that or no to that, you also have to be mindful that maybe the capacity for mentorship is not available at that time because they already have so many mentees. Some people are not very direct when it comes to saying no. They give you subtle hints. So you have to be able to cue into that body language, but since it's not in person, you may have to cue into it more directly by email. But being direct does not mean being rude in email. It means being firm and asking simply, in a follow-up email after you let them decide, after you resend this email with those suggestions, if they don't come back with any, following up and saying, I know that you may be busy and I know that you're world-renowned for the things that you do, but I'm wondering if we could just have maybe 15 minutes per month or once every 6 months to mentor me. And if they follow back up and say no, you have to respect that space and then you have to move on. So that's something that you have to do.
I agree. And as whoever is asking the question, he or she must be mindful of the time that is needed to not only submit a grant, but to write it first and to write it so it would be funded. So I would put in timelines from the first time that I submitted a request via email and give them at least 2 weeks to respond before sending out the follow-up. Once whatever time you have there, you want to be mindful of that. So you don't want to just have yourself hanging out there, as Dr. Hinton says. Mentors, they are very subtle, just like writing a letter of recommendation. Although we do not slander the person, but there are ways that we can write a letter to say if we really are in favor of recommending this particular individual. So I sometimes think silence is your answer. And as Dr. Hinton has said, we must be mindful to accept that and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Great advice. So I wonder if you might provide some words of encouragement for the next comment. So after 6 years of full-time teaching and 2 years to my early career stage status ending, not being able to secure a tenure track position, which would allow submission of extramural grants, I'm close to leaving academia and seriously considering industry. So.
What was the first part of what was the first statement?
After 6 years of full-time teaching and 2 years to my early career stage status ending, and not being able to secure a tenure track position, which would allow the submission of extramural grants, I'm close to leaving academia and considering industry potentially.
Okay.
I would say before ending your career in academia, I would say maybe instead of just focusing on, I'm not sure how many universities you've applied to secure position and in the tenure track position, I would say shoot higher, aim higher. Maybe it's time to not just consider a tenure track. Let's aim at being a dean, a president, a chancellor. We have for example, we have a provost who came from an advisor's office, academic advisor, and now he has the role of a provost. So before you make that move, because we need you desperately, we need all the help we can get in academia, especially in higher education, I would say aim higher. Aim higher than the tenure track. Aim higher.
And I agree with Dr. Shuler. I also want to comment on the fact that you may have to expand your scope of institutions. There are a myriad of Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, African American colleges, which are known as historically Black colleges and universities, and there are more PWIs that are in places that maybe you may not think. University of Wyoming, for example, may not be on your radar, but it's an excellent school, you know, or University of Kentucky. You may think a rural area may not be the place for you, but if you actually find out, it's in a very thriving city. And another example of that is Iowa. A lot of people always ask me about why you're in Iowa. Well, the research here is really high quality, as well as the mentorship and the guidance that we receive. And we actually have a very diverse pool of individuals at the University of Iowa because we're in Iowa City. And it's a very liberal area, so that more walks of life can interact and everyone's more accustomed to that. So if you do your homework and you move out your search, you may be able to find what fits for you. I also recommend that you get a career counselor. I don't know what institution you're at, but maybe going to the career development office to actually look at your CV and figure out where you may have some deficiencies so that they can be addressed so that you can reapply. And also don't think about just using your ESI, your earliest, EIS, your early state, ESI, I apologize, early stage investigator only by yourself. Try to champion for yourself by having a collaborator who may be more senior, so then you can actually have R01 grant, not by yourself, but with someone else, or be a PI on an R21. And maybe you have to move into a space that's an R25. Maybe you're running a training program with someone else so that you can get your name into the NIH system and then go back and then reapply. And then if you're thinking about, and if it was a K99 that you applied for and you're doing teaching, maybe apply for a K01 because it doesn't have a date if you are a American citizen or a green card holder. If you're not, then I would suggest also try for foundations that supply money for investigators, and maybe your proposal could be used by other individuals in a different way. So don't just think about one disease relevance, think about multiple models and put in more grants. And the last other comment that's very important, use the National Research Mentoring Network to find out who may be able to help you in your career. So while you're on here, may be able to connect with someone. One person that I could think of that actually has straddled both research and teaching is Laurie Connor, who's at Baylor College of Medicine. She's an assistant professor. I think she's assistant, maybe associate. Sorry, Dr. Connor, I don't remember. She's works in the diversity office, but also is a faculty member in molecular and cell biology. And so she straddles both. Another individual that I can think of that you could potentially contact and wouldn't be opposed to helping you try to navigate that space. If you're interested in higher education, I would contact Dr. Marcus Lambert, who's at Wiley Cornell Medical College. He's an assistant professor and also an assistant dean of diversity, and he does research at both places. And what I mean by both places is in both capacities, in the diversity office and also in his department. He just recently published an eLife paper around mentorship and understanding underrepresented groups, and it was phenomenal. So those are some helpful hints to help you to get where you need to go in your next set of space that you're trying to navigate.
Wonderful suggestions. Thank you so much. Okay, so can you elaborate on some of the benefits of professional Twitter? I'm concerned about unnecessary people posting things on my profile.
Got you. So, sorry, I had to laugh because I totally understand. You can set your page to not have anyone retweet what you're stating. So there are some individuals, for example, I really like Yvette Hewitt, who's at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. She posts a lot of things. She'll retweet other people's comments on professional Twitter about science or an award that someone's won. But what she'll do is she'll make it untweetable. So meaning that she can only tweet it, but no one else can. And sometimes the same thing with your statement. So sometimes if you don't want anyone to misconstrue your words, you can have it to where, you acted as a comment on someone's blog or their recent post, or you make it untweetable so that you can get your point across. And you can also block people. You can also direct people to direct message you. So you could say, please DM me your comments. I don't want certain comments on the wall, or you can turn off comments on certain social media spaces. For example, at Facebook, you can turn off the unsharing. You can unshare, or you can share, or you can turn off the comments. So there's a lot of things that you can do within the social media space. There are seminars that are given by the Big Ten Academic Alliance that maybe you could reach out to Dr. Charity Farber, who runs a lot of those programs. And there was a presentation that was recently done on social media, and maybe you can ask her for the slides and who actually did that presentation, and you can actually work with her to be able to navigate how to work on social media. And I also think that the scientific influencers, so that you know who to follow and emulate, and I think that's the best place that you could do. There are people that don't tweet a lot. For example, my boss is on Twitter, and he doesn't tweet a lot, but he's very definitive about what he says on Twitter. So you could follow Abel's account and find out what the best representation of excellence looks like on Twitter and how to get the most out of to maximize your post on his account. You could also look at my account. I'm a little bit more liberal. I don't post a lot. I retweet a lot because I'm trying to be a champion for others. But when I do post, I try to make things definitive. I try to have a little bit of humor, but not negative humor that's sardonic, that would open the gates for questioning what I'm posting. So just a general rubric is you want to be professional by managing how much you post, what you post, and how you post it. Those are key things to remember. Another thing is following people that are in science that you think do science well, and following maybe organizations like the NIH or Cell Metabolism or Cell Press or Cell Mentors blog, you know, just as examples of what you can tweet and not tweet, and then scientific influencers as well, which you'll learn about as you get on the science Twitter, for example. Dr. Shuler, do you have any comments about this?
That is your field of expertise, not mine.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so any more questions?
Yes, we have time for one more. So if you could briefly touch on some of the pros and cons of e-mentoring versus virtual mentoring, or excuse me,
Correct.
versus in-person mentoring.
That's great. So the benefit of e-mentoring is that usually people will connect you via email or by, you know, for example, the National Research Mentoring Network. And a lot of times I tell people you can just give them my phone number and then they can contact me, just drop a line beforehand. So I do a lot of mentoring via, you know, email. I ask for the CV. I ask for transcripts if they're a student. If they're a postdoc, I ask for goals and keeping in mind. And if they're instructor level faculty or like assistant level faculty that have done teaching, because I've done teaching before, then I'll talk to them, or I'll redirect them somewhere else if they're higher up. But one thing that I like to do is think about that they can be together. They're separate, but they can be together. If you have a flexible mentor that's willing to first meet online and then talk to you in person via, you know, Skype, then it becomes a very dynamic meeting setting. And I think it can be very rewarding when you do both. So that's one concern. I like to take the middle approach. But if you have to do them separately, the benefit of having a mentor in person is that you can see their verbal as well as their nonverbal cues, and you can understand what they're saying. At eMentor, you're not able to really say to the voice part per se unless you get comfortable, and then later on you start to Skype. But at first, you're going to be reading text. So you don't want to read too much into it. You just want to take the advice as it comes and to be able to understand and parse out what's important and what's not important to you, and be appreciative of people's time and efforts. Dr. Shuler, do you have any thoughts?
I agree totally with what you've said.
Okay. And I guess that's everything.
However, we do have one more comment. So thank you so much for answering all of the questions live. This has been so helpful. Cannot thank you enough. And she also requested that we share your contact information to connect on LinkedIn. So
okay.
Of course.
Of course.
No problem.
Wonderful. Well, we cannot thank you so much. We cannot thank you enough, Dr. Shuler and Dr. Hinton, for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to relay some of this extremely helpful information.
Well, it's an opportunity.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Alrighty, folks. Just as a reminder, we will be placing this recording on the NRMN YouTube channel. Also, Dr. Hinton and Dr. Shuler have invited you to explore the remainder of the presentation to get a better sense of these practices in play. So please do explore those resources, and please do sign up for the NRMN newsletter so that you are informed about the next webinar in this series. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.